If you've ever run a full marathon, you probably questioned your life choices. You also likely questioned why the F they had to tack on that extra zero point 0.2 miles after the first 26. Isn't 26 miles enough? Or hell, even 25? Well, it turns out that at one point it was. During the first decade of modern marathoning, a quote marathon was just some long distance, somewhere around 25 miles or 40 kilometers, with any discrepancies usually based on where the race organizers felt like placing the start and finishing lines. That is, until the Olympics came to London in 1908. Today is Thursday, July 24th, 2025, and on this day in 1908, the first ever marathon measuring 26.2 miles was run by 55 athletes from 16 nations. In this episode, we'll learn how exactly they settled on that specific distance, plus hear about the controversial first place finish and the DQ that followed. I'm your host, Running Up That Hillary, and you are listening to Today in Running History. Okay, so the year's 1907, and the International Olympic Committee is getting ready for the Games in London the following summer. When they start looking at potential routes for the marathon, the king offered them to start on the lawn of Windsor Castle. And obviously, they weren't going to turn down the King of England offering up his castle. So that's where it began. The main Olympic Stadium was almost exactly 26 miles away from Windsor Castle, so they easily plotted a route between the two landmarks. But then they realized that all of the spectators in the stands of the Olympic Stadium would want to watch more than just the last few seconds of the race. So they decided to tack on one lap around the track too. But then they decided that they wanted a more visible finish line. So they put it right in the middle of the track, and instead of a full lap, athletes would run the incredibly random distance of 352 meters. The final distance ended up being exactly 26.2 miles, and the marathon distance was born. Just like in the 1900 Olympics in Paris that I talked about a few episodes back, the 1908 London Olympics were long. In fact, these were even longer, lasting from April to October. They had some nice spring and fall days to choose from, but the IOC instead decided to hold the marathon on one of the hottest days of the entire year, as they tended to do back then. 75 athletes were registered to compete, but 20 of them decided not to start. So the race began, and the 55 remaining men set out from Windsor Castle. So I found the full 864-page PDF of a book published in 1909 that listed every single detail of every single event. So I have a lot more random factoids than usual. For example, there is a full list of rules, and here are two that amused me. No competitor, either at the start or during the process of the race, may take or receive any drug. And I guess that makes sense because back then the closest thing they had to ibuprofen was some sort of cocaine tonic. And then here's the other one. Every competitor must wear complete clothing from the shoulder to the knees, with jerseys sleeved to the elbows and loose drawers with slips. Okay, so no drugs and lots of clothing. Got it. But what about nutrition on the course? The OXO company, who made bouillon cubes, had that covered. They would provide athletes with flasks filled with their product, available both cold and hot. For anyone who didn't want to drink broth, there was also soda and milk available, but I can't find any mention of plain water. And surprisingly, they actually had some pretty decent food options along the course, including raisins, bananas, and rice pudding. And I was going to make fun of the rice pudding part, but honestly, it's high in carbs, and if you can stomach it, that's actually a pretty good fuel choice in 1908. In addition to food and drink, the aid stations also offered wet sponges, which obviously it's still common today, and cologne, which is not. I cannot imagine being mid-marathon and taking the time to dab on some cologne at an aid station. That just blows my mind that they even think of that. Okay. And this is probably my favorite part of the aid stations. They just sneak in the sentence in the middle of a paragraph that says, stimulants will be available in case of collapse. They don't define what stimulants, but again, it was the early 20th century, so it was probably cocaine. Now let's get back to that race. Early in the race, the lead pack included our friend Tom Longboat from the July 4th episode. And by the way, that's a good one. If you haven't listened to it, I really recommend going back and listening. Plus another Canadian, 2 Brits, and a pastry chef from Italy named Dorando Pietri. Around the halfway point, Longboat and Pietri remained in the lead pack, and a South African runner named Charles Heffron took the lead. At some point after mile 15, Tom Longboat had to drop out of the race, and Heffron increased his lead on Pietri. And then out of nowhere, around mile 24, came 3 Americans: Johnny Hayes, Joseph Forshaw, and Alton Welton. That's a mouthful. Alton Welton. I think they threw that in just to mess with me. Anyways, these 3 had not been part of the lead pack at any point of the race, but as the leaders began to fade, the Americans sped up. Pietri, the Italian, soon passed Heffron, the South African, but as soon as he got to the stadium, Pietri collapsed. Volunteers helped him up, but then Pietri fell 4 more times during the single lap of the stadium, and race volunteers helped him up each time. He finally crossed the finish line first in a time of 2:54.46, which was a new world record. About 30 seconds later, American Johnny Hayes finished, followed by Charles Heffron of South Africa and the other 2 Americans. Now, I love this part because it really reminds me of the women's marathon at the Paris Olympics last summer. So if y'all recall, the second to last finisher finished in about 2:55. And then the final runner, Kensang Lamo from the tiny country of Bhutan, was nearly an hour behind, but she chose to finish what she started rather than drop out when it got too hard. Lamo finished in 3:52.59. Back in 1908, other runners kept trickling in, and the penultimate finisher had a time of 3:53.15. The final runner on the course was George Lister of Canada, who finished with a time of 4:22.45. And I can't find much info on Lister, but I just love the fact that he made it to the finish line despite being a full half hour behind. So the original podium of this event was Pietri in first with a new world record, Hayes in second, and Heffron in third. But because Pietri had been assisted over and over and over 5 times, the American team launched a complaint. And because it had happened in front of a stadium of 75,000 people, the IOC felt like they kind of had to disqualify him. Pietri's DQ meant that Johnny Hayes was actually the winner and that his time was the real world record. It also meant that Heffron was elevated to silver and Joseph Forshaw to bronze. But there was a silver lining for Dorando Pietri, as Queen Alexandra was so moved by Pietri's refusal to quit that she awarded him a gold cup. It wasn't a gold medal, but it was a pretty decent consolation prize. That, my friends, is all I have for y'all today. Make sure you like, subscribe, follow, share, and then send this episode to a running buddy that you would like to share some broth and rice pudding with. I hope all of y'all will join me tomorrow as we remain in 1908, this time for the Olympic final race with only one single competitor. I'm your host, Running Up That Hillary, and this has been Today in Running History. And now, like, I've done this so many times, like, I can actually, like, hear the intro music that you threw on there. Now, I found the full 864-page PDF book, PDF of a book. The OXO company, who made bouillon cubes. Oh God, that's so hard to say. Around the halfway point, Longboat and Pietri remained in the lead. Other runners kept trickling in, and the penultimate. So hard.